video, I just want to make a little notice, alright? So, I do apologise that this video took so long. For some reason, I just lost a bunch of footage on my iPad.
My iPad really said, 而家係我嘅資實時候啦。
A bunch of edited and non-edited footage of this third video, this third script here. So, I have had to re-record it, but yeah, I'll do my absolute best to upload it in a quick enough time. Without further ado, let's begin. Hello everybody, welcome to the third video in a three-part series, which goes into detail about the play created by myself and a groupmate entitled Rhys in the Spotlight, or Rhys en y Chwedlwyr. In this video, we're going to take a look at the final performance and ask ourselves a few questions.
Ja hoor, daar staat ik weer, zonder ander gebitje, want ik heb er weer een scheurtje in mijn haar, gelukkig.
What went well in the performance? In our performance, I can think of a few things whose final result I was happy with. So let's talk about those first, starting the video with a positive feel before we get into some criticism. The first thing I was confident about, for the weeks leading up to the performance, was the way that the script had turned out. Hear me not wrongly, I'm purely talking about the script itself, and not necessarily our memorization or acting in the moment. Those items come later. When I'd written the very first draft of scenes 1, 4 and 5, and we went through the words, it was abundantly clear that the dialogue sounded robotic. However, after vigilant and rigorous editing of what I'd written down, the difference was like day and night. There were not too many issues with the monologues, although they endured the same editing to a lesser extent, because monologues do not have to worry about being conversational as much as dialogue does. Something that I feel like I did well was act as Alwyn. After a lot of character work, including brainstorming, formation, introspection, hot seating, researching, and many more things, I had a very clear idea of what Alwyn was supposed to be. Not in the same way that someone might imagine the appearance of a character in their heads while reading a book, as I tend to struggle a lot with visualizing even basic things in my head. Rather, in the way that a reader might imagine the character from that book in everyday scenarios as if they were a real-life friend. Basically, I knew a lot about Alwyn. Additionally, forming Alwyn's character in phase with acting with him allowed me to not only know who he is in sense of a character, but I was also able to become him on stage and get out of character off stage. During the final performance, I think that this quality shone through quite well to the audience. For example, I'm happy that I knew Alwyn so well because it allowed me to recover from the slip-ups on stage without breaking character. I believe that staying in character is one of the absolute most important things to do on stage, even when you're trying to distance and alienate the audience. Breaking character can ruin the performance. So it's imperative that, even if you have to improvise for a while, you stay rigidly in character. It is much easier to avoid breaking your character when you do a lot of preparation. I'll go into a bit more detail about some of the opinions that the audience members had in a little bit, but overall, they were quite entertained. I believe this is in part because of the different climaxes in the story. A climax of action, comedy, energy, emotion, objectives, plot, etc. Not all of these actually happened at the same time, and if they did, then the story would feel quite cliché and monophonic. There also appeared to be some amusing moments for the audience, which I was very happy to see. It appears that my work to keep the audience entertained went not to waste. I talked about that with monologue feedback in the last video. Something else that I liked a lot was the audio track I made for the very end of the play. It was very nice to be able to apply my composition to a physical thing in the real world, rather than them just being used for exams, portfolios, or just existing in the tortured files department. Not only did it make me happy to see these items that I made used for other purposes, but I feel like it meaningfully added to the atmosphere of the play, especially given the twist that happens in that section and the emotional levels there.
Comfort, you can still get positivity from.
Well, if you've been watching the last two videos, then you already know what I'm going to say. I've been hinting at it so much. So let's begin by talking about the accidental mishaps and oversights with the lights. As I've been mentioning time and time again, there was something wrong with the lights in our production. I'm not interested in pointing fingers, in any case, but even still, it seems like this was just a really unlucky coincidence. It threw me off quite a bit when the play started, and when the lights came on in an oceanic blue, I was convinced that somebody was trying to bring April Fools to come earlier in the year. However, this was resoundingly not the case. I thought our lighting technician had accidentally done something and turned on the wrong button or something, so I waited a few seconds before coming on stage. I was hoping like, okay, so maybe if someone's made a mistake, then they'll be like, oh no, and they'll change it back, but there was no mistake. It was just a glitch, and thus nothing changed. And I didn't want to make the audience wait any longer, so I just went on stage anyway. I'm glad that the lights didn't have too much of an effect on our acting, and scene 1 was really the only scene whose colours were fully massacred. The others were quite alright. Here are the lights for scenes 2, 3, 6 and 7, scene 1 from the front and from on stage, and scene 4 and 5. As a comparison, here are the lights that actually came on during the performance during scenes 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, 6 and 7. Can you see the difference? Midway through scene 7, you can actually see the glitch go away. Pop! And the lights are back to normal. Another issue with the lights, however, was that they shut off in the middle of scene 2. Roll the footage. I believe this was because there was a miscommunication in the lighting cue sheet. I wrote that they should be shut off when Alwyn goes backstage to look for Owen, which happens at the end of scene 2. What happened was that the lights shut off on the wrong instance of Alwyn calling for Owen, as he was still on stage. However, I just kept speaking and acting out the scene as if the lights were on. After all, it's not like people cannot hear in the dark. I could have also called for Owen to come and fix these lights or something, or said anything that an annoying politician who puts himself on a pedestal would say to his assistant, but it didn't matter so much. The audience can still hear in the dark, as I've just said, and the lights came back on in due time anyway. Even though they weren't the same lights, they still came back on. Something else that may or may not have been noticeable was that my costume stayed the same between scenes 5 and 6, despite those scenes being about a year apart, in canonical terms. I mean, washing machines exist, so it's not out of the question, but this was not the original plan. Even if the audience didn't realise it, me wearing the costume again in a scene from a different time period would have been confusing, as it could have led them to believe that this took place on the same day. The reason I forgot to change the costume was because of the lights again. Between scenes 5 and 6, the lights did not shut off properly, which meant that the audience would have seen the transition. This wasn't meant to happen, and it really threw me off quite a bit. Following this, there was a slip-up I had in scene 6 that I do not feel I recovered very well from. I pretty much forgot the scene in its entirety. I didn't use any filler words like or Instead, I stayed still. I looked around and tried to continue being Alwyn even in the face of deafening silence. It wasn't easy, but luckily Ed managed to pick up on this and took us to the part where Alwyn receives the letter from Alana. I actually remembered this part, so all hope was not lost. And it pretty much just comes down to I did not practice the lines enough. So I'd memorized them at first, but then I didn't practice the lines that I'd memorized enough, and they slipped out of my memory, and yeah, that could have been avoided, but I've learned now, even when you think you've memorized them, you still need to keep practicing them. Anyway, enough about scene 6 already, eh? There was one slight nitpick I wanted to make about scene 5, and the underlying cause of it. I've 2 words. Sister. No. You be careful with that phone.
Don't worry. I'll be back before you can talk about your sister.
I don't have a sister. I'll tell you about it.
Why are you talking about your
And document. Will or something? You have illegally taken my property and shat upon my livelihood, Mikey.
No. If you let me, you know what? Let me get the document out. Unfortunately, I've lost the document. No, that's. No, that's not the document. Oh.
This kind of slip-up is normal, and it's derived from being nervous. I'll admit, the 2 of us were quite nervous about the performance. My nervousness was all about my lines. I didn't care who or what was in the audience watching me make a fool of myself over sending an email on stage. A lot of people would genuinely rather be naked in front of people than sing in front of them. But I'd quite happily sing my heart out before even rolling back my sleeve. No thank you, ma'am. However, I think Ed was nervous in a different way. He didn't seem to worry about lines as much as I did. Rather, being on stage in front of people you know was what got him on the day. This caused some slip-ups, but as I mentioned in the last section, I think we actually recovered quite well from them. Did my research pay off? How much of it can we see integrated into the final performance? Well, after asking my friends and grandmother, who came to a unanimous agreement that social media has become more toxic and less healthy in the past year, I believe I was able to thoroughly incorporate this into the play. Furthermore, the other topics that I researched about were included as well. Despite my memory slip, I still made sure to include the line about dopamine avoidance or dopamine fasting, which I used as a scapegoat to represent the way that lifestyle trends tend to make the rounds on social media. Somebody will claim something to be a fact, people will follow what that person says because they look up to them, and they'll be met with disappointment. In my opinion, the issues with social media definitely came through in our performance.
Comment vas-tu? I'm supposed to say my name in French, right? Je m'appelle Amélie. Je m'appelle Amélie. Oh
The audience had some interesting opinions. Given that my father was one of the audience members, he picked up on a few things that the other audience members may have missed, correctly remarking that he saw some real-life conversations I had with him reflected within the play. The parts of Scene 6 that I actually remembered were based on conversations a lot of neurodivergent people have with their parents, teachers, or counsellors, especially if they're trying to justify their own existence or being accused of making excuses about something.
Not that that's ever happened before.
My brother Patrick, who I've talked about in previous entries, thought that our piece did quite well to represent the social media issues that we had in his experiences, and some of my other classmates in the audience thought similar things. On the other hand, he also thought that it wasn't actually very obvious enough that there was a time jump between scenes 5 and 6, and it was not very easy to distinguish when the scenes changed if he wasn't reading the script. And this was even given that he was backstage not knowing what costume I was wearing, so I think that the fact that I didn't change my costume would have maybe added to that confusion. And Patrick's really good at English, so wording isn't something that's going to confuse him. The thing that would confuse him is an inconsistent story, so that is something that should definitely be improved upon. Many of the audience members were part of the Xanadu cast. I forgot to mention, but that was a show that we were doing at the same time that we were doing this performance, so a lot of them had time during the time we performed, so they came to watch the show. And they had quite nice things to say about the piece. Some of them asked me if I wrote the play myself, saying it seemed very professional and high standard. Another person said he found it very funny and entertaining. A lot of the people who gave me lots of compliments were some people that I wouldn't necessarily be like that good friends with if it wasn't for Xanadu. And so it was actually really nice to hear good things from them and to hear like other people's opinions, because I always love to hear other people's opinions if it's critical or anything, or positive or extremely hateful. So thank you to everyone who gave an opinion. I'm very grateful for you coming to watch the performance, and I really did hope you enjoy it. And that is your reminder that if you are learning English, do not feel bad about making grammar mistakes, because I'm supposed to be a native speaker and I just said that sentence. In general, I think the performance went quite well. It definitely could have been better in some ways, namely memorization of the lines, but aside from that, everything didn't go horribly wrong, and not everyone can say the same about their performances, so that's already a start. I'm glad to have had this opportunity to show my creativity through a piece of theatre and express my opinions and research via a witty, maybe even twitty, comedic yet somewhat realistic display of what could go wrong when being addicted to social media and hurting yourself and other people. Alright people, thank you so much for watching this series. A big thanks to all of the teachers in our school who made this possible, and to my groupmate and myself for being able to work together to create this piece. Rhys, for the final time, out.